Dr. Jazz. Well, I love the gig. You and Leon sounded amazing. I mean, yeah,
Thanks, man. Thanks.
just
Hope he's doing all right.
yeah. I mean, but I wanted to ask you about actually At the Edge of the World, since you I mentioned Leon now, and it's such a beautiful record. I listened to it now a couple. I mean, I have a couple of records of yours, but I listened to this one on Bandcamp a couple of times, and it's just so beautiful. What you guys do, and how did this story with Leon actually happen? I mean, I knew him from the records with Jackie Harrison, like the early '90s, I think, even, or something like that. But how did that trio happen? And is it still alive, or?
Good. Yeah, a couple good questions. I met Leon my very first year in New York. So I came from Boston to go to the New School for 1 year in 1991.
Already? Oh shit! I thought you were later. Oh, okay. Okay.
He, yeah, I was 17. I mean, I'd just gotten
Wow.
out of high school, and um, I had heard Leon on some albums, and he was kind of the man about town at that juncture, right? He was playing with, he had a trio with Jackie.
Yeah.
Briefly had a trio with Brad.
Exactly.
He he was playing with Joshua Redman sometimes. He was playing with Dewey Redman all the
Yeah.
time. He was playing with Kenny Barron.
Baron. Exactly. Yeah.
He was playing with Tom Harrell. So he was kind of out and about. But he was also, friends with some people that I knew. Like he was friends with Adam Cruz, the drummer.
Hmm.
Adam went to New School with me, and he was also friends with this saxophone player named Virginia Mayhew, who I played
Hmm.
with from time to time. And so I would kind of see him around. He would come to the New School sometimes and do sessions. And I don't know, I think we actually met on a Virginia Mayhew gig at the 55
Oh,
bar.
wow. Oh, wow, man.
I mean, that was
Beautiful.
my first time playing with him for sure. And I remember, being excited, 17. Um, and, you know, I didn't have a lot of contact with him after that. I mean, I would play at the Village Gate. Sometimes he would come
Mm.
sit in, or I would certainly go to hear him play a lot. But then I left New York. I went back to Boston for college, and then I'd come to New York in the summer. So I was around, and he was in my consciousness. But I don't think we ever played again
Oh,
until. Uh, I mean, I knew it. I heard all the stories that he had moved to France, that he had stopped playing. Um, he had briefly kind of re initiated his band with Jackie and Ogana, but
hmm.
as a group project. So I remember being excited that they were going to play again, and then never getting to hear them. And uh, I was kind of like hoping that at some point, he would come back on the scene because I loved his
Yeah.
playing, and he's such a one of a kind, you
So
know,
unique. Yeah. Yeah.
human and musician. Like there are a lot of great drummers in the world. I mean, I play with a lot of them. But somebody so singular, it's a loss if they leave the scene, right? So I was always kind of curious if he was still playing or not, and became really hard to track him down, right? He was never I don't think he's ever had a cell phone as far as I know,
Oh,
which
wow, man.
which I understand because I also didn't have a cell phone until about 2006 or 2007. I was trying to hold off as long as I could until I was literally the last person. I think Jeff Ballard and I were the two last people with cell phones, besides Leon, who had left a few years earlier.
That's a nice
So
group, man.
the uh, the problem was that he not only was he not using a cell phone, but also he would change his email a lot, which he still does. Um, so that made it hard to track him down even by email. So long story short, I had a gig in France, and it was kind of a one-off, like a single gig. So I wasn't able to bring people from New York for it. So I thought, wow, this is a perfect opportunity to see if I can track down Leon. and with some help from, I think, from Xavier Felgerol, who's a has a record label in France, and a few other people, I tracked down his latest email, and it was a funny email message I sent because I hadn't really played with him since 1991, and it was
Oh
like
wow, man.
2013 or 14, and but he remembered me, and basically I said, "Do you want would you be up to do this gig?" And he said, "Yeah, if you can provide drum set and cymbals and drumsticks, um, I'll
Wow.
I'll be into it." So, but he said, "But you should know I haven't played a gig in 3 years."
Oh wow.
So I said, "I don't care. You're Leon Parker. I don't care. Let's do it." So, of course, the way things always work out, I tried to make sure that we all arrived early so we could rehearse. But of course, we didn't. Somebody was late. I don't remember who, and so there ended up being no rehearsal, which was, in a way, it was probably better because that's Leon at his best. He's just
Yep.
ears are open, just excited for whatever happens in the moment, and just improvising his way through tunes. I mean, we played some of my original tunes, and
Oh wow. Okay.
as well as some standards. But he just that's the magic of Leon. He's so in the moment. Of course, it's nice to rehearse too, but
Sure.
the extra magic comes out in those moments. So it was kind of a little magical first reunion, and he had fun, and of course I had fun. Audience had fun, and he said, "Yeah, man, I thought I'd given up on jazz, and I wasn't really into it, but I think I like it actually. At least I like playing with you. So if you have another gig, give me a call."
Oh wow. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so then, they invited us back to do the same gig the next year because everybody liked it. So I said, "Okay, look, how about next year, same time, same place?" And so we did it again next year,
Oh wow, man.
and then something funny happened, which is that I had a gig in Paris, at much higher profile gig at New Morning,
Hmm.
that was live broadcast, and Greg Hutchinson was supposed to do it, and his his dog ate his passport.
Oh my God.
Which sounds like a crazy excuse that only Greg could come up with, but I love Greg. Greg, I love you, brother. It does sound like an impossible story, but it's actually true. Um, so I saw the keyed up passport. He was in Rome. He's living in Rome at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Dog crushed his passport. They had to get a new passport, and they were waiting for it. So I tried to convince Greg that he can just fly because it's within Europe. I thought he
Yeah.
could fly with a U.S. Driver's license, maybe like Europeans do. But in fact, that's not the case. And so he got stopped in the airport. Um, so basically, at the very last minute, I was frantically trying to reach Leon, and email wasn't even fast enough. I had to call somebody to get his wife's number, and um, so long story short, Leon got on a train at the very last second and got himself from Toulouse to Paris
Wow. Okay.
again, like at the downbeat of the gig. Like the audience was all there. We're all waiting, like we're standing there, backstage, like shit. And maybe we should go out without him. There's no way to reach him because he doesn't have a phone. So we're just begging he's going to show up, and he walks in. Literally, it was after the downbeat of the show. It was about 20 minutes late. Puts this puts the one cymbal down on the drum set, and we just hit again, like live broadcast, full club. Another great gig. I think Reuben was on that one,
Hmm.
and after that he said, "You know what? I think we should start a band, um, but you can't call me at the last minute for shit. We need to plan. We need to plan in advance." So we had some gigs, and I was of course flattered that he was into it, and he hadn't played anywhere. I mean, especially not in New York. He hadn't played in New
Yeah.
York in over 10 years, probably closer to 15 years, and he hadn't been touring regularly in at least 5 or 6, 7 years.
Mhm.
So I thought it was just, okay, this is going to be great. It'll be fun for me and it'll be good for him. It'll be good for the world, for Leon to be back in the scene and playing some jazz, which he'd almost given up on. He was focusing entirely on body rhythm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So and teaching and body rhythm and voice, which is still his
Think, yeah,
concept.
yeah.
So, but I was also encouraged by the possibility of combining his thing with my thing, and I didn't see them as two separate worlds. And Leon will tell you that he saw those two things as completely separate worlds, whereas
Oh,
for me they were
wow. Interesting.
integrated and easily integrated. So it was hard. I mean, I kept kind of encouraging him to do more and more body rhythm type stuff on our gigs. And at first he was resistant, but I think he realized that I was right, that they were like easily integrated
Yeah.
and very effectively integrated. And that became extra fun for both of us. I think that was rewarding for both of us. So long story short, I applied for a grant, the French American Jazz Exchange grant, which is
Oh, okay.
it's a funny story only because it's supposed to be only open to one American and one French person to collaborate. So it's supposed to encourage collaboration, and it's a very generous grant on behalf, thanks to the French government and the cultural arm of the French government.
Yeah.
And they've sponsored a lot of very cool collaborations. My original plan was to do this grant with a completely different person, Jacques Schwartzbart. I don't know if you know
Oh, yeah,
Jacques.
sure. Yeah, sure. The saxophone player. Yeah, sure. Love it.
Another old friend of mine from almost as long as Leon, and we actually got as far as applying for the grant. Jacques and I, we sat down. It turned out it was the day it was due. We didn't realize it was the day it was due. We sat down to fill out the grant proposal, and then we read the fine print that it's not open to French people that live in the U.S. So
Ah,
Jacques,
I see.
Jacques is a Guadeloupean French guy who lives in New York, so that made him ineligible. Um, but I thought to myself, well, if Jacques is ineligible as a French guy living in New York, maybe that should make, or maybe that would make or should make Leon Parker, an American guy who's been in France for more than 15 years,
Yeah.
eligible. So of course there's no one to call. It's the last possible day. I have a few hours to fill out the thing, and there's also it's not written anywhere, and I doubt anyone had ever even proposed this idea because on the other hand it's kind of a crazy idea because essentially it's like two American citizens benefit from French
Exactly.
government. Um, but long story short, I said I got nothing to lose. I have a good education. I can fill out this grant application. I sent Leon a quick email. Um, hey man, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to do this thing. If it works at some point, you're going to have to give your input. And I filled out the application. I sent some stuff, and to my shock and surprise, they gave us the grant.
Ah, okay.
Now it turned out later that I found out that two of the people on the grant committee, I'm not sure how many people on the grant committee were one, a great French jazz pianist who's a friend of mine and Leon's, and my ex-manager who works for Jazz at Lincoln Center in New York. So I think we had an unfair advantage, which was very, very, very helpful. So thank you to, government of France and American Jazz Exchange. So I'll always be grateful to that. And it really helped a lot of things to happen at the time, right?
Mm,
I don't think that it would have been possible for us to start this band and collaborate if we hadn't gotten that grant money. So we were able to
sure.
we were actually basically able to make two albums. One finally Leon just put out himself as his
Okay.
own project. So
To check it out. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of on his website.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Cool.
So yeah, basically the money are going towards a couple things. A little bit of tour support. He got him to back to New York, so we played our first gigs in New York, and we also recorded these two projects. One became my album, one became his album,
Ah,
and
okay. Cool.
after a lot of various amounts of time, but yeah, it basically launched our collaboration, and it's still launching Leon's own solo project, which makes me even happier because that
Yeah.
was something he really wanted to do as well. Um, and then yeah, then we started touring with a couple different bass players, and finally Matt became the consensus best choice bass player for the band. And then yeah, we had like a couple of beautiful years. We went to Asia, did some European gigs, did some
Mm.
American gigs. Leon went through various periods when he thought maybe he was going to move back to New York, and he tried, and then he moved back to Europe. So, it went through uh, various phases.
Phases. Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't quite clear at the beginning if Leon wanted to have a cooperative band, like whether it was supposed to be Leon and Aaron together, or if it was going to be Aaron's band featuring Leon, and then Leon might have a band later featuring Aaron,
Yeah.
or we had many discussions about these kind of things, and we had many amazing musical experiences, and we had some you know disagreements at times too. And we then basically then COVID happened.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
We had kind of a little bit before COVID, we had done what felt like the last little incarnation of this round, and then COVID happened, so it was kind of a nice time to kind of separate our lives again and see what the future brings. So personally, I'm super psyched that his project is out,
Yeah.
and
Super.
happy with the thing that we were able to put out under my name. And I have some nice bootleg gigs in the can,
Oh man, come on.
that I may release to the world at some point, and I
Yeah.
hope there'll be the right opportunity for us to collaborate again in the future, and for the world to hear a lot more of Leon, which is
Basically, you brought him back. I mean, that's beautiful in a way. I mean, he decided, of course, but you were the initiator, right? So that's beautiful to do. I mean, nice.
yeah. At least I helped bring him back to jazz, right? Because
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
he wanted to be out there doing his body rhythm project, and I think he is, and I hope
Yeah.
that he will be even more. But yeah, I think he realized at minimum from this kind of this collaboration and this sort of recapitulation of his jazz life in a new form, right?
Yeah.
That he does want always to be part of the jazz scene in some form or fashion, and the jazz scene, wants him to be part of it. So
Yeah, we're happy, man. It's beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. How did you decide, like, for the repertoire? I mean, there's like Ahmad Jamal, there's like McCoy, kind of,
Right.
for every pianist, the obvious, people to listen to, I guess. But like, how did you decide, like Bobby Hutcherson tune and your tunes, of course, but how did
Yeah.
that come together?
Um, yeah, another good question. So, in short, it was basically about what I thought Leon and I would enjoy playing together,
Okay.
and what felt natural for us. So, luckily we had a chance to play together a fair amount before making that record. Not extensively, but enough to try different things, and um, there seemed to be a kind of concentric circle or a Venn diagram like overlap of stuff that he liked and I liked, and it was pretty sizable. We have pretty similar tastes in terms of like the jazz tradition, what we love the most. And then there's just some stuff that felt like it was possible but didn't feel natural, and then there was a lot of stuff that felt super natural.
Sure.
Not supernatural, but super natural, extremely natural. And I think that was the feeling I wanted on the album. Just that it was kind of organic and comfortable for everybody, so
Yeah.
that we could get to our thing in the studio. And and showcase our connection. So if you have a nice musical connection, conversation ability with somebody, you can kind of sit down with any material and make something out of it, and bring the feeling that you're looking
Yeah.
for, or that you're hoping to have. So I think that the short and easy answer to that is like, I just chose the material that felt most natural for us to connect on. And um, but the more interesting question is like, why was that material the material that
Yeah.
felt natural for us to connect on? And I think the answer is that we do hear in similar ways a lot of our favorite, most iconic music. Like we agree on some of our favorite shit, and that stuff that we did is related to some of our favorite musicians for personal reasons that do connect us, right,
Yeah.
as humans. And we connect everyone in certain ways, we don't connect in other ways, and the things that help us to connect are the things that we love the most. And Leon and I have a lot of shared love for similar people, similar artists, and similar music. And that explains kind of why we were circling around each other, even though he's a good 10 years older than me, and why I always loved his playing and why he liked my
Yeah.
playing too. So yeah, there is a kind of deeper reason inside our personalities and our artistic taste that does explain why that material. And to another degree, it was also about
Yeah.
in terms of the Ahmad tune, like what would allow him to get to some body rhythm, what would be a nice vehicle for him, and also like I wanted the trio to sound distinct from my other projects, and
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It sounds, yeah.
right. So it needed that particular vein of material to kind of distinguish it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about writing the original tunes? When I listened to your, I mean, I transcribed like years ago, Ohm's Blues that you wrote, the extreme up tempo, older F blues kind of. I love the lines on that one. But what was your process here? You wrote a couple of tunes for the new one as well, right? Or when you write music, like how did you imagine Leon playing some of this stuff, or like what was the process there or even in the past? I mean,
Good question. So both, sometimes I absolutely do write with people in mind,
mm,
and including like tunes I wrote for specific people, like for Mark Turner,
yeah,
for Omar Vital, people that or for Josh. I have written some songs with those particular people in mind, as not just tributes to those people, but also like I want to hear them play this
yeah,
song,
sure,
and or this song exists because of my relationship with them and the musical output of that relationship in my brain, the way that they've affected my hearing and my mind and my creativity. In the case of Leon, I think the original songs on the record were not songs that I wrote for Leon as much as they were songs that I had written recently that I
mm,
felt like would suit Leon. It wasn't that I had him in mind when I wrote them, but I knew that they would be things that he would enjoy,
yeah,
and would sound great on. So uh, I kind of hope that in the future I'll write something more specifically for Leon, because he did give me a lot of musical gifts and a lot of ideas, and I think he is such a unique musical force that it does inspire me to have some creative compositional ideas that might suit him, and would also create something nice for us to kind of reconvene on. So, but it hasn't happened yet. I did arrange there are some sort of arrangements, subtle
hmm
arrangements that I would say came together with him in my mind. But I didn't write anything on the record specifically
okay.
for. Yeah.
Looking forward to hear that. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, you've been extremely prolific ever since you become a band leader, writing your music, which is
I wish that were true, but I
oh, come
cannot.
on, you wrote a lot of music, man.
I cannot accept that compliment.
Oh, come
I,
on.
I know some extremely prolific people.
Okay,
And
but since Turning Point, you wrote so much. I think a lot of music, so and a lot of great tunes. I mean, you know. Tokyo
Thank you.
blues, man. Come on.
I'll accept the idea that there's like some quality, but I cannot accept the idea that there's
Okay.
quantity because
Okay.
there's so many people writing so much music. I mean, I can name tons of them, but I mean, Tom
Sure.
Harrell,
Sure.
you go to Tom's house and he's just got like hundreds and hundreds of tunes in drawers that the world hasn't even heard yet.
And all are amazing, right?
All amazing, right? Yeah, you just pull one out of a drawer. Oh, let's just try this one. How many more are there in those? And they all look impeccable. Yeah, and some of my peers as well.
Sure.
But I am, yeah, somebody that, or my favorite example, Guillermo Klein, who's an actual
Oh man,
poet.
sure. Yeah. Okay.
Every,
Yeah.
he tells me like, look, if you want to write, you need to write every day. So I've never ever even tried to force myself to write every day, which at some point I still hope in my life I will. Um, but yeah, even Josh, I think Josh is going through periods where he's really extremely prolific, and we haven't heard all of his tunes, or of
Oh,
course
sure.
Mark, Miguel,
Yeah.
any
Yeah. All
guys.
these guys. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I have tried to very, very slowly and inconsistently keep myself writing music, but
Do you write like ideas? Like if you get an idea on a daily basis, I mean, or like even if an idea pops up, do you have like a notebook where you keep phrases or harmonic progressions or whatever? Or
I wish I could say I was that organized. I used to have, and I used to have, and I still have kind of a little pile of
oh
little
yeah,
scraps of
snippets
paper
or whatever.
ripped out or back of a chart that already exists, and there's kind of some half tunes. There are definitely like some half tunes in the pile and little ideas. Recently, I realized that I'm kind of outdated, and I should at least just record. I also went through a period when I recorded on a little
Oh yeah, like a
what were those things called that don't even exist anymore?
mini disc kind of, or no, mini disc, right? No,
I
it's a
had, of
mini
course,
disc,
mini
right?
disc, and
Yeah.
also the first little iPods. But then I would lose the iPod, so I lost a lot of kind of good tune ideas when I lost the iPod. I lost two iPods. That was both on planes, both tragic. So now I just been recording on my phone,
Yeah,
little
sure.
audios or videos. Although I managed to lose one of those too. Not lose the phone, but erase the phone. So anyway, there's no single good way to do it. But yeah, I try to take some notes on occasion. And it is often true that I come back to stuff later and it does turn into something. So
Yeah,
it's a great idea. For everybody
yeah.
there who hears this, listen to Sammy. Yeah, it's a great idea. Do it.
Yeah, I mean, so many people like Ross Losing, the piano player.
Yeah.
He had like during this COVID time now, like a quest to write a tune every day.
Yeah, man. I mean,
And it's
huge props to
incredible.
people like that.
It's incredible. It's just like
I think a lot of people had that dream and fantasy. I certainly, when it looked like we were not going to be able to tour for a long time, I thought, okay, this will be great. And in my case personally, I was thinking that I would every day, work on solo piano because, can't play with people, something I'd been wanting to work on for a while. And I managed for a while to kind of keep a good practice focus.
it's hard. Yeah.
And then it got harder and harder. But I have many friends who said, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to write one tune a day or one tune a week. And it was particularly hard at the beginning because it was just so sad. We were losing
Yeah.
jazz
Yeah.
musicians, people dying that we knew, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Such a sad time. Who knew when we were going to come out of it? Trump was in office. It was like very hard.
That was a bad time for you guys.
Very,
I mean, for
very
everyone.
hard to find positive motivation, even just to practice, but let alone to write a tune. I think now is a different time. Now, yes, and I think maybe starting last summer, there was a little more energy, but the first 4
Yeah,
months
sure.
really, really tough.
Yeah, can imagine. Yeah, but
How's it been for you guys?
I mean, the same for you. Like first 2 months was terrible, but then I kind of adjusted to it. And for me personally, I mean, I haven't had a more creative period in the last 10 years than now. I just practiced every day, like a couple of hours, wrote tunes, did long distance recordings and stuff like that. So,
Oh, good for you.
Figure out how to do some more mixing and mastering stuff. And yeah,
That's inspiring.
it's inspiring, but then you miss the whole gist of jazz, which is, I guess, communication, seeing the guy you're playing with on the stage and looking him in the eye and, feeling the energy, which we all lacked in the last, almost 2 years now. So,
Yeah. I mean, the thing that saved me was I just started inviting friends over to my place to play.
Yeah.
I felt like that was enough for me. I didn't need to be on tour playing for audiences, but I did, and I do need to be playing with people,
Play. Exactly.
humans, making music, feeling that groove of other people and finding it together. That's why, I fell in love with this music, why I wanted to be a professional jazz musician, if it were possible. Just that feeling of playing together is necessary.
Yeah.
And I can't get that same fulfillment from practicing every day.
Oh no, sure. No. Yeah.
So that was a great just reminder, I think, of what I really value, the most in this music. And I would do that if I could never play a concert again, I would still
Oh yeah, sure.
play.
Yeah. That's what we did here as well. Do sessions and record stuff or bring new tunes just to keep motivated in a way. I mean, in the end, it's also about playing. We do that because we just love, like you said, the groove of the other person. I mean, you cannot put it more beautifully than that. So yeah. I wanted to catch you there. Like you said, like when did you decide to become a professional musician? What was that moment, the trigger?
Yeah, so I
Because I know you studied like psychology, right?
there was yeah, so there was a moment when I thought, first of all, when I was a kid, I fell in love with jazz in high school, but I never for a second thought that I would ever be capable, good enough to become a professional. It was just a feeling of, wow, this music is magical. I have no idea how it's possible that it's made. I can't believe it's improvised. Like, who are these geniuses? I suck at it. I'll never get good. I don't know how to get good. It's impossible that anybody gets good. Like, it was just a slow process of kind of unraveling or taking apart the pieces of the music, trying to put them back together, figure out how one learns, what is actual jazz pedagogy, not necessarily like what you get taught at Berkeley, but like how did Charlie Parker learn? How did John Coltrane learn?
Yeah.
Or even how did Joshua Redman learn? Or how did anybody who's good, or of course great, actually get good or great? And I had one of those old Jamie Aebersold play along records with the play along CDs with the book, and it gives it lists you the scales, and fortunately I had a good teacher in high school who did not say like, oh, the way to learn is to learn this scale and play that scale.
Yeah, smart. Yeah.
His way of teaching us how to play was, sing something simple and try to play that thing. Learn your chord tones, 1, 3, 5, 7 or 7, and learn to hear the chord tones, and then that'll help you learn the sound of the harmony, the changing harmony of the songs, and then just sing something and play that thing you're singing. That is the fundamental correct principle, right? But it's hard to, when you're a kid, it's hard to get from that, like John Coltrane, you can't, Charlie Parker, it's like, are they really singing that stuff? And then you realize later, oh my God, they are. They're really hearing that stuff. Oh my God. But it seems impossible at the beginning. And it definitely didn't seem like, they're just playing the scale that Jamie Aebersold tells. Like, that doesn't sound like John Coltrane. That doesn't sound like... So, there's this huge mystery that you have to solve about how to get better. And, I owe so much to my first two teachers. The one I mentioned, Bob Sinecrope at my high school, and then Jerry Bergonzi, who was somebody that Bob connected me with.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Got a little more serious. So my last year of high school, I studied with Bergonzi, and that
Really? Oh man.
Bergonzi's a master teacher. He's
Yeah.
spent a lot of time thinking about how to teach and what works and what doesn't. And he's also kind of, um, I would call him like a doctor, a jazz doctor.
Yeah,
Like
man. Come. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
you go to him with an ailment, a weakness in your playing or a musical problem, and he's going to give you the medicine to solve it quickly. You walk into the doctor's office, you don't sit there for 3 hours. You walk in the doctor's office, doctor comes to see you, maybe you wait 15 minutes. He diagnoses you in like 30 seconds. He gives you these pills, take 2 of these, call me in a week. That's Bergonzi, like, oh, okay, they're playing this. He says, oh, wait, you need this. Okay, transcribe that McCoy Tyner solo on Passion
Yeah.
Dance and work on this exercise in all keys. Brrr, boom, go. Call me next week. See you next week. And then at some point, that was crucial because the medicine that he gave was the medicine that I need. He's a great doctor, and he's done it for so many patients. So that was huge. But again, I never thought that I would. I mean, I started to get better at first just because I listened to the music all the time. It's a language, as you know. You have to listen to it a lot in order to become a more fluent speaker of it, and I fell in love with it, which meant I was happy to listen over and over and over and over to the same stuff, which is exactly what you need in order to get better, to build the vocabulary. But I didn't realize I was getting better just by listening to it. I was.
It's so important, man. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So,
Yeah.
but of course, then you start to sing your own melodies, and the melodies that have entered your mind affect the melodies that you come up with, and the feeling of the music that you've been, dancing around to affects the feeling of your music when you try to play, and it's a pretty organic process. But all that being said, without the medicine, from Dr. Gans, I probably wouldn't have been able to get better enough to even consider becoming a professional, which I still hadn't and was very far from. But what I did want to do was go to music school for a year. So, after high school, my parents were definitely not into the idea of my going to music school, and they'd spent their whole life kind of assuming that and preparing for their kids to get a liberal arts education, in something other than music. Certainly not pre-professional type music education.
Yeah.
Or pre-professional anything, right? It was always about getting the best wide-ranging education you can, and then maybe when you're 20 something, you decide what you want to do with your life. And there's not that many options from their perspective. There's doctor, not jazz doctor, but real
Sure.
doctor. There's scientist, which is my dad is a scientist. There's some other kind of academic. Maybe there's lawyer.
Law, yeah, for instance, yeah.
Maybe. Or the various professions that you can, engage in if you have a law degree, which are not necessarily only
Derived from that kind of, yeah.
from that, right? Like politics or something like that, and maybe there's writer or journalist, maybe. I think there's nothing really beyond those options or there weren't in the minds of my parents. So this idea of like going to music school was not feasible, permissible, imaginable. But the irony is that I really only wanted to go for a year. I just wanted to get off the train that was taking me to, medical school or wherever the last stop of the train was. And, going to New York when I was 17 in 1991.
Man, yeah, I can just imagine.
Being able to go to Fat Tuesdays and hear Joe Henderson and Freddie Hubbard and and Bradley's and hear Cedar Walton and Mulgrew Miller and Leon Parker and not to mention like McCoy Tyner and Chick Corea and Herbie and George Coleman and hopefully even play with some of these guys if I were to get better. That just seemed like a magical dream, like that I had to make reality somehow. And I was younger than my classmates, so I had an argument, like, hey, I started school young, I finished young, I'm a year, sometimes 2 years younger than people in my grade at school, so like you guys owe me a year, so I want to take a year and do this thing. Not possible. Well, long story short, I did it anyway, and of course, I ran out of money quickly, but I did have that incredible experience of getting my ass kicked
Mm.
in New York and getting super inspired and getting a taste of that, which was the 5th year of the new school. So the new school had just been invented. It had just graduated its first class with Peter Bernstein and Larry
Oh
Gould
yeah,
and some
those guys. Yeah,
guys. And Brad Meldau was a
Brad
student
Miller.
at
Yeah.
the new school. Roy Hargrove was a student at the new school, although he never actually came to class. Um, although he would waltz into ensemble and play a couple killing choruses and then waltz out. But of course, he didn't need to be in school. In fact, what I realized, you know, with all love and respect to all music schools and also especially new schools, that none of the best players in the music school really need to be in music school. And that makes perfect sense because Charlie Parker didn't go to music school.
Exactly. Coltrane, whoever. Yeah.
Didn't go to music school. So there were no jazz schools. So, which is not to say jazz school isn't amazing, and it was amazing for me. But it was a crucial learning, wake up moment for me, because it meant that I didn't have, if I didn't stay in music school, that didn't mean anything as far as my future. Like Herbie Hancock
Yeah.
studied engineering. So wow, Herbie Hancock studied engineering, and he's the greatest living jazz pianist. I mean, not that I'm Herbie Hancock, but still, that means it's possible. It's
Yeah, I
humanly,
agree.
or at least
Yeah.
superhuman like him, superhumanly possible. And Joshua Redman, who then came on the scene around that same
Yeah.
time when I went to new school, he had just graduated from Harvard, which was the kind of school my parents wanted me to go to. And he had just won the Monk competition, beating out all these amazing music saxophone players, some
Yeah.
of whom I knew, who had all gone to music school. Not all graduated, of course, but meaning that it was possible to do this either without being in a school at all or while studying something else. And that was crucial for me also to realize that. I said, okay, wait, my future is actually up to me, and it is in my own hands in some way.
Mhm.
Like if I can continue to get better, I can make this a career. But I didn't know that I wanted to. I just knew that suddenly I realized during that year of the new school that it was possible. And it was partly for the reasons I just said, and also partly for the reasons that when I left, I had a lot of confused friends. Why are you leave? Like, why would you leave? You're getting better, and you're like starting to get on the scene. I just played a few, my first gigs around New York, and I explained the situation. It's more complicated, of course, but I also realized that okay, all these guys are staying. I'm leaving. They're all planning to become professional musicians,
Musician. Yeah.
and some of them are way better than me at the time, like Brad or Roy, but some of them were not. Like some of them were kind of my peers, and some of them were struggling even more than I was, and yet they were all trying to planning to become professional musicians. There was no fallback plan, right? There was no
Yeah.
backup. So I thought, oh well, maybe this is possible. So let me figure out how to do it. Let me figure out how to keep this door open. And what do I need in order to continue to get better? And what I realized, what I needed in order to continue to get better was a community of other musicians. That was what I needed, and that's what music schools.
Yeah.
You know, that's the need that music
That's the
schools.
main thing. Yeah.
What music schools do best. They bring together all of these hungry students with some knowledgeable teachers with experience, and they create a community that lasts forever. I still play with the musicians that I
Yeah.
went to the new school with, that I met in those early years in the 1990s, and that I met subsequently in the next 4 years when I went to Harvard. These were guys who were going to Berkeley and New England especially Berkeley, but also New England Conservatory. And I used to play at this club called Wally's Cafe in
Hmm.
Boston, an amazing club that so many cats played at. And I still play with the guys that I played with every weekend at Wally. So what I found in Boston was exactly what I needed, that community. And I
Yeah.
owe Berkeley a lot because they provided me that community. And I never took a class at Berkeley, but I was at Berkeley so much that Berkeley thought that I was a Berkeley student, and they started posting, alumni messages about me and stuff. But I never took a class. But I do really owe them an enormous amount. And now there's a joint program, there's a joint you can study at Berkeley and Harvard at the same
Yeah.
time. And of course, if that existed at the time, I would have done it, but it didn't. But it didn't. It felt like I was in that program anyway, because I was spending my days, studying philosophy and psychology, and I was spending my nights, in the recording studio at 2 or 3 in the morning with Reuben and Adonis Rose and Teodros Avery making little homemade recordings, because that was when the studio was free.
Beautiful,
And
man. Yeah.
that was a great way to spend my 4 years. Plus, I could go back to New York in the summers and reconnect with all my new school friends and play some gigs. And then Smalls opened during the
Yeah.
early '90s period, which was amazing because we were already starting to lose, Bradley's and Fat Tuesdays, and nothing had come to take its place. And it was we were losing, of course, some masters of the music as well. But also like that was the beginning of this feeling of like, oh, the '90s, actually a magical, wonderful era for jazz. And we're losing a little bit of the magic because we're losing some clubs and losing some people that made it so magical. That oldest generation of cats. I mean, Barry
Yeah.
just left, so
Yeah.
he was kind of emblematic of the last. He's not literally the last. I mean, you have Roy Haynes is still.
Yeah. It's incredible, man. Sonny
Roy
still.
Haynes, Roy
Yeah.
Haynes was always kind of just superhuman above the scene. Barry was like really on the scene, but you would go see Barry, he'd be everywhere. You could go take a class with him, you could hang out with him, you'd go see Cedar, he'd be everywhere. I'd see Cedar Walton in the bank. He lived
Uh-huh.
in my neighborhood. He tried to sell me his old car from 1980. Mosley Miller, he's everywhere. These James Williams, he's everywhere. These guys are all, right there. And we've lost so many of them. So the '90s was, in retrospect, an amazing time for jazz, also because the big record companies were still interested in jazz.
Exactly.
Were selling albums at the time. And people like Joshua Redman and Brad Mehldau were benefiting from that, thanks to Witten and Branford and, the people that followed, including like, Diana Krall and other people that kind of, Harry Connick brought
Yeah.
jazz up in visibility in the 80s and early '90s. That benefited my generation of the people that followed. So yeah, I was fortunate to kind of come on the scene at that time. It's tougher in many respects for
Yeah.
generation
Definitely.
now.
Yeah.
The 20s, they don't even have any idea, what it was like for us then, in comparison. And then the whole internet and social media side of things has made it, from my perspective, a completely different scene for young musicians than it was for my generation. And I tend to see that development as, more negative than positive, but I see there's definitely positive sides to it. So that's a whole nother topic. But
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
that was a very long-winded way of answering your question.
No, please. I love
The
it.
short answer to your question is, actually, I never decided that I wanted to be a musician. I do remember that the moment when it became possible in my mind. I said, wow, this is possible, maybe. But it wasn't until I graduated college, 1996, I moved back. I decided, okay, what am I going to do for 1 year after? I don't know what I'm going to do in my future. I can't predict 5 years from now. I can't even predict 2 years from now. But I'm going to say, for the next year, I'd saved money. I'm going to move to New York. I have some gigs in Boston. If I need to, I'm going to drive back to Boston and do those Boston gigs to pay my rent. I had a little apartment sharing situation with 2 friends from college. I paid $400 a month.
Wow. Yeah.
A little tiny room with a mattress in it, and then I put my piano in the larger room, shared room, and they would go to work all day. They had office jobs, so I could have sessions, and everybody would come over. We'd just play all day. And when I
That's
wasn't
cool.
playing, I was practicing. It was a perfect situation. There are not a lot of places in New York City where you can just play all day and no one bothers you, but this was one of them. To my credit, I made sure that we lived in a place where no one was going to complain, and I had only $400 a month rent to pay. So if I needed to, I could go back to Wally's. I could play $250 gigs Friday and Saturday every weekend. That would make $400. All I had to do
Yeah.
was get one more gig for the rest of the year. I could pay at least my rent, my rest of the month. Sorry, I could pay my rent and survive. And that was basically how I survived my first year in New York, going back to forth to Boston, playing little gigs, and meeting a ton of musicians just by playing in my living room. And then I started to get better and better gigs, and that's
Yeah.
the kind of organic way
Yeah.
that I realized, wait, I don't know if I decided to become a professional musician, but I am actually surviving as a professional musician. So let's try it another year. Let's see what happens. And then by 97, 98, I was
Hmm.
starting to go on the road. And then, as you know, when you start to go on the road,
Who was the
90,
first time that you went with?
I mean, of course, I'd played some, road gigs around the US, but the first overseas gig I did was with Jerry Gibbs.
Oh, really? The drummer. Oh,
Jerry,
wow.
Jerry
Really?
Gibbs,
I didn't
Jerry
know
Gibbs,
that. Really?
Jerry Gibbs and Ravi Coltrane had a
Oh, man.
quintet or sextet actually. Thrasher, Jerry Gibbs,
Thrasher. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay.
and we played a gig in Germany. I think that's my first memory of going specifically like to Europe for a gig.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
And around that same time, I also played with Terry Gibbs. So Terry Gibbs is still alive. He's 90. He's 96 too.
Wow.
He's he told me the other day on the phone, like, I remember being the youngest bebopper, and now I'm the oldest bebopper. It's just only Roy and me left. Um, so I played with Terry Gibbs's band with Buddy DeFranco, which was really
Yeah.
like some old school bebop, and then Jerry's gig, which was, and Jerry played in Terry's band too, um, with Robbie, which was a different thing. Those were like the first little, sort of touring experiences, 1997.
Hmm.
And then but maybe more consequentially, I was playing with Gregory Tardy's band. Greg Tardy.
Yeah, I love him. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Greg Tardy's awesome. He was playing with Elvin at the time. He got a record deal on Impulse, and he made an album. And I was in his working band, and the album had Mulgrew on half the tracks, and I
Yeah.
played on half the tracks. Tom Harrell was on the album too, and Eric Harland and Reginald Veal. And that was the first time I played with Eric was
Oh,
with
okay. I wanted to ask you that. Yeah. Yeah.
Greg, who was responsible first both for giving me my first real serious recording session, for a major label, and also like having to share the piano and the studio with Mulgrew, who was one of my heroes, still is one of my heroes and favorite people. So that was a rite of passage, and also because it brought Eric and me together, and we had a kind of strong instant musical
Yeah.
connection. I said, okay, this should be developed, and that's how my trio with Reuben and Eric started
Yeah. How did you meet Reuben then? I mean,
at Berkeley. So
Berkeley. Okay.
Reuben was one of those guys. He came to Berkeley the same semester
Okay.
that I came to Harvard, and we're almost exactly the same age. He had just started playing upright bass. He was a great, you know,
Yeah.
Caribbean and groove bass, electric bass player. You know, R&B, smooth jazz, funk, everything. Um, and he's super talented and started playing upright bass. And within like a few months, he was playing with Marsalis. But you know, in the meantime, he was going to Berkeley, and he stayed in school. He actually finished Berkeley. So the
Hmm.
entire time I was in Boston, he and I played together, every week for 4 or 5 years. So
Wow.
that was a crucial, moment meeting him. I think I met him in that, recording studio at Berkeley at 2, 3 in the morning. You remember? I always tell this story. I remember looking over on a tune. We were playing a Swing In at the Haven, which is the Ellis Marsalis tune. And I remember looking over at him in the booth, and he was pulling the chords, and I looked over, and there was blood coming down the bass because he didn't really have calluses yet. He was
Yeah.
still like an electric bass player trying to pull. I think actually it must have been blood was probably coming from this hand, dripping down. I was like, man, is that Are you okay? Is the bass
Oh,
okay?
shit.
We played on through the blood. Anyway, yeah, that's how I met Reuben. Reuben and I kind of brought Reuben and Eric together, I think, as far as I know. Reuben was playing with Ali Jackson, who was another friend of mine with
Oh,
Open's
that's how
band.
with Ali happened connection. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I had met Ali even
Mm.
earlier because his brother Carlos McKinney,
Hmm.
was a great piano player, played with Elvin too around the time
Yeah.
that Greg played with Elvin. Carlos and I went to new school together, and actually we auditioned for Manhattan School on the same day. So, and
Wow.
Carlos brought Ali, his younger brother, to accompany him on the audition. And so we met in the hallway of Manhattan School, both nervous, like 17-year-olds. Carlos probably wasn't nervous. He was already like wearing a suit and he knew he was going to, get in with full scholarship. But he, and they were cool. And Ali was super nice. And we heard each other's auditions. And, it was like nice mutual respect situation. And then all of a sudden, boom, I went to new school, so did Carlos, and we were kind of on, he was in the new school like all-star band, and then like at some point I came behind him in the new school all-star band, and it was like, yeah, we were, I haven't seen him in a long time. I have unfortunately, Carlos became a big time producer, R&B producer.
Mm. Oh, I
He,
didn't know that. Wow. Didn't know.
um, so he doesn't live in New York. I think he lives in LA, but I haven't seen him in ages. But Ali and I stayed tight, that entire time.
Yeah, with
Ruben
Ali.
and I were playing with Winton at that same time, so I kind of reconnected with Ali. Long story short, yeah,
Yeah.
'97. Eric, Ruben, and I came together, did a few gigs. That became a trio, and
And that's how
then
turning point happened, right? I guess.
that's how Turning Point happened. And around the same time, I was playing with Mark Turner. Got a, I think he'd already had a record deal, but he
Mm.
I don't remember exactly what year Mark put out his first Warner Brothers record, but all of a sudden Mark, we all knew Mark. Mark was the man. Even
Man, I love Mark, man. Yeah.
90s, Mark and Josh had been roommates. Everybody knew
Yeah.
Mark. We played a lot of sessions, but the general public hadn't really discovered Mark yet until he put out those Warner Brother albums. So then he had a band. He was able to play some jazz festivals. He had some management and agents behind him, and I played in one of his early bands around '97. And so Joshua Redman, I think, heard me with Mark somewhere, or was at least aware that I was playing with Mark. And then I was also playing with Jimmy Green's band. So I was playing with a bunch of
Oh, yeah,
different
exactly. Yeah.
players, which probably I also owe to Bergonzi because at some juncture, Bergonzi hired me to play in his band. So I went from like learning, all his medicine to, playing, trying to play with him. And that was also a rite of passage for me. Bill Pierce as well, great tenor player. I
Hmm.
played with him in Boston, so I had some
Oh,
experience
really?
playing with great saxophone players in Boston already. When I came back to New York, that probably helped me a lot. So for some reason, I was just playing with tenor players. It was basically like all the tenor players.
Yeah.
The only gigs I had were basically with tenor players, which was perfectly fine with me because I was playing with all these great tenor players. Another one was Jimmy Green,
And John Ellis, you played with John also, right? Yeah.
John, right? So
Yeah,
those are all my
exactly. Yeah.
favorite, and they were all my favorite people, and it was a fruitful period, right? So through playing with Jimmy and John, and later Ellie DeGibri, what is
Hmm.
another guy,
Sure.
um, but mostly because I had that background coming from Jerry. Um, Josh was kind of aware of the fact that I existed. Plus, I had gone to Harvard and he had gone to
Mhm.
Harvard,
Oh,
so
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
at different times. Then I ran into Josh in a recording studio, coming out of a Jimmy Green recording session, and then that's when we kind of said like an official, "Hey man, hey wow, you're Joshua. Yeah, I know who you are. Boom, let's play some." He said, "Let's play sometime." I said, "Great. Here's my number." He called me. Um, I set up a session. Ruben came, and Yaron Israel was this. Yaron Israel, the drummer. So
Sure.
Ruben, Yaron, that
Interesting.
was actually
Wow.
that might have been the only time I played with Yaron in my life, unfortunately. So yeah, we did a session at my apartment, and then Josh started calling me for gigs. So he had at the time he had a band
Mm.
with It was at time of that album, Timeless Tales.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, I love that one.
Brad and Larry and Brian Blade were in the band.
Brian, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there were a few gigs that Brad couldn't make because his solo career was already super happening. And Josh basically called me to sub for Brad a few times. It went well, and then told me he wanted to put together a new quartet, and I was honored and excited. And so then it was just a question like, who are the other guys going to be? Long story short, ended up being Reuben and Greg, which was
Right, yeah.
the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship. Yeah, I mean, that's 25 years ago almost.
Yeah, I mean, come on, beyond and passage of time, those two records are, that's classics almost now. I mean, come on, it's like 21 years old already.
More.
It's almost those two records, but it's like history or almost, I mean, it's 20 years.
Strange to say that. It's strange to say that, but I understand how it all works now. And yes, it is sort of living history.
Yeah,
we are living history. We're living dinosaurs. We're still, most important, we're still friends, and that's partly because we like each other's people, but also partly because we have a strong musical connection, always did, and hopefully always will. And this band has gone through various iterations. We've played 300 gigs a year, we've played not at all, we've come back together for reunions. Then it seemed like we were actually again going to be a serious touring band, and then COVID happened. I mean, when COVID happened, we were one day away from starting a European tour.
Oh shit! Oh man!
I had already gone to Europe, had to do some teaching in Finland. Everybody else was coming the next day. Then Trump announced they're going to close the border.
Yeah.
The gigs were still supposed to happen. Got canceled. I had to go home before the border was closed. And here we are. 2 years later, haven't really emerged yet from that.
Yeah, bizarre. Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, things will open up slowly, hopefully. So,
I mean, they already have in New York, but the big tours.
Yeah, it's hard to plan and predict. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I'm grateful for all these long, amazing musical friendships that I've had with all the people I've mentioned so far, and that kind of tells the story of my jazz career in a way. It's all these people that I met.
Connections, yeah.
But it's not connections in the networking type of sense. It's like
no, what you mean. Yeah.
Very, very organic musical friendships that just start. Most of the time, in most cases, they started before anybody was famous. And famous mean jazz famous.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, sure.
One is actually famous, but. And they just organically developed from there. Of course, Josh was already well known by the time I met him, but in every other case, all of my relations were with people that were just like me, basically, and they just stood the test of time because they were strong, musical and personal friendships. And of course, not every relationship that I had stood the test of time, right?
No, but it's just like what you're saying now, all these records you talked about now, for me, they're like, I remember I was like, 19 or something when Beyond came out. I still have the CD, the originals, and on Remedy, it's kind of, you influenced with Kurt's, of course. I mean, the younger generation come in, and those records are like, I guess for the young generation, or even for us, like, as important as, for people growing up in the 80s, being teenagers who listen to, I don't know, if you look at it like that, records who came out in 65, let's say Miles or whatever. So it's, if you put it in perspective, it's actually, it's important stuff that you guys already did, all of your peers and you guys. So,
I mean, it really hits home when I think about, Herbie Hancock making his first record, Taking Off,
Yeah, exactly.
And he wasn't even thinking about like becoming a jazz star or anything like that. He was just trying to play with Miles and, survive the gig and play as good as he could. And then he makes this record, like, what songs am I going to put on it? I got to write a few little things. Like, I got this session, and then 40 years later, you know, I'm there listening to this magical 30, it was 30 years later, I'm listening to this magical piece of history that just seems like it's always existed
Mm.
and could not have been more genius, right? And then, and Herbie himself, first of all, probably doesn't even remember what tunes or solos are on there, probably never listened to it again, listens to it and is like, oh, I sound like such a kid there, you know.
Probably, yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I remember talking to Ambrose and realizing that, like, exactly what you said, that when he was in high school, he was listening to Turning Point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And like he forever, you know, we've played a bunch of times and even made other records together, but for him, like, he'll forever associate me with Turning Point. And like from his perspective, that's a good thing because like he listened to Turning Point over and over when he was in high school and like fell in love with Turning Point the way that, you know, not the way that I listened to Taken Off, but like the way that I might have listened to, I don't know, Joshua Redman Wish or something like that.
Yeah.
Or better, the first Joshua Redman record with Kevin Hayes on it.
Yeah. Wow, man, I love that one. Yeah.
So, right, and it gets passed along, and now Ambrose's records then influence the next generation of high school kids. And of course, who knows if our records will stand the test of time in the way that, you know, Coltrane's records have. But even if they don't, like they did sort of have an impact on certain people
Definitely. Yeah.
at that time, right? And it doesn't matter if they didn't sell 100,000 or 300,000 copies, although Joshua Redman's record, you know, Mood Swing, I think did sell hundreds of thousands of copies. But for that brief, amazing moment, right, in the 90s.
The 90s, yeah.
I watched sorry, this is a little bit of an aside, but I watched this Kenny G documentary.
Oh shit, I haven't yet. I don't. Is it okay or?
I mean, it's a must see because it's sociologically fascinating.
Yeah.
Psychologically interesting. There's a lot of really smart things about it. Ben Ratliff, the New York Times ex-New York Times jazz critic, he kind of steals the show in a certain way. He's like,
I'll check it out.
Of everybody that appears in the movie, he comes across by far the best. There's a lot of things wrong with it. There's a lot of things right with it, and there's a lot of things wrong with it. And for a professional musician, it's interesting because you see the things that they really did right, and you see the mistakes they made too. But the reason I brought that up in this particular moment is there's, you know, Kenny G, as you might imagine, he's all about like how many records he sold, right? And especially at that time, and especially given his career trajectory, and especially given his relationship with Clive Davis, and everything about how he was sold and marketed and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that the film does right is it sort of shows the phenomenon Kenny G as the product of record company and radio play at a certain time in America, and various other trends that are super interesting that have to do with capitalism and, you know, office workers leaving their offices. And
I'll check it out. I'll have to check it out.
It touches on a lot of bigger issues that way beyond Kenny G, and you sort of see Kenny G as a symptom, or, you know, rather than the cause of any problem.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not, you know, Kenny G just being Kenny G. It's not like you can't hate Kenny G. The person, you can hate Kenny G the person, but you can't hate him for being himself, right? Like you can hate his music, but you can't hate him for being himself. And one thing that really does come across strong in the film is like he's just being himself, you know.
Then that's okay, yeah.
For better and worse.
Yeah,
like
sure.
Like it's not something we have to love, right? We don't have to say like, oh, but he's a great guy. No, but he's not the problem in our society, right? Like he's a symptom of any problems that we might have. Long story short, there's this amazing sequence where they show how many records he sold in various points in his career, and they kind of dramatize them in a visually stimulating way.
Man.
You see the pile, right? You see the pile growing, and then, you know, they talk about why this pile starts to grow, and then all of a sudden, like, there's this pile, and it, you know, it gets up to like 4 million, and, you know, he's the 25th best-selling artist in any genre of music.
Seriously? Oh man, I didn't know that. Wow.
yeah, it's nuts, you know. It's like the Beatles, you know, boom, 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 you
Kenny
know,
G then.
Rolling
Man,
Stone, you know, Beyonce, like
wow.
Michael, well, sorry, Beatles, Michael Jackson, right? Then you get down to like 26, Kenny G. So, you know, there's this moment when all of these things come into alignment in the industry that have
Yeah.
nothing to do with Kenny G at all. And that just results in his record sales going from like 200,000, which is pretty insanely great, to just like six or bad, insanely great, depending on your perspective. Is it great or bad?
Yes, yeah.
Like the hell or heaven of Kenny G selling like 4 or 5, 6 million records. Uh, all that stuff has very little to do with Kenny G, right? It's just so like Joshua Redman, okay, made this record, Mood Swing. The record is good, the tunes are
Yeah.
good, the
Yeah.
band is killing. But like, so that album of Josh is just at the right moment in his career, at the right moment in the industry, at the right moment, all these forces were behind it, sold, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 times more than any other album. And that's really interesting. As musicians, we assume, maybe because of Kind of Blue and
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, we as musicians, we assume that the best albums sell the most, at least in the jazz canon, right? Like, okay, can I mean, we know that Kind of Blue isn't that much greater than all these other masterful albums, right? But we also are like,
Yeah.
oh, this is iconic, this is great. I want to listen to it again and again and again.
Yeah.
There's a reason
It has
why
something. I mean, yeah.
I recommend people buy it. Like, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
go
I
buy the
tell
greatest
every student. Yeah. I tell
buy the
every student.
greatest
Yeah. Yeah.
selling record in jazz history.
Yeah.
Why? I'm not telling people to buy it because it's the greatest selling record in jazz history. I'm telling them to buy it because it's great.
It's good. Yeah.
It's better than good. It's amazing. It's super beautiful.
It has
And
something. Yeah.
but of course, in general, you know, the music industry doesn't work like that. Like it's not a perfect meritocracy. The best shit doesn't rise to the top, and we should not be misled by examples like Coltrane and Miles who do rise to the top, that the entire scene works like that. Of
Yeah.
course, we know it
Exactly.
does.
Yeah. Exactly. But speaking of industry and albums, I wanted to ask you, Aaron. So when's the next one you're planning to release after the edge after at the edge of the world? I mean,
Yeah, so
what's the plan?
so right before COVID hit, uh, Eric gave me a call, and we, you know, because I've been playing with Leon and for various other reasons, that let me put it this way. The last gig that we played with Eric and Reuben was on my 40th birthday.
Ah, wow, okay.
Which was a pretty awesome gig. It was 7 years ago. It seemed like that was a nice moment to stop that trio, you know, put it on the back burner and put it on hiatus. And then I started playing with Leon's, you know, the project with Leon, and Eric, you know, has been leading mostly his own band
Yeah.
and playing, of course, all the
Charles
gigs
and yeah.
Charles and everybody. And you know, Reuben and I play together regularly and with Josh and a lot of other bands, but I hadn't been playing very much with Eric at all. And after a long period, you know, when we played a lot together. So at some juncture, he gave me a call and he was like, "Man, you know, I miss you. I miss the trio. Like, let's. I have a recording studio. Let's just go in there and play some tunes. If we like it, we can release it. If we don't have to. Just for fun. You know, it's anytime you want." And I was like, okay. I thought, let me think about it. You know, I thought about it for a while. Then the timing didn't work, and then we finally found a day when we could go in there. And anyway, we recorded some stuff with no preparation. And then I didn't think too much about it. I got sick while I was that particular day. It wasn't like a perfect situation. On the other hand, it was clear that like it was awesome to play again, and we have this, as I was discussing,
Chemistry, yeah.
strong chemistry that we'll always have, and it was nice to experience that again. And And then, you know, 9 months went by, and then Reuben called me. He was like, "Hey, man, have you listened to the session we did with E?" I said, "No." He's like, "Hey, check it out, man. There's some good shit on there." So I listened to it, and I was like, "Oh, actually, yeah, there's some good shit on it." Um, and this gets to the issue of like perspective and expectations and feeling sick while you're playing, so you don't really
Yeah.
understand how it sounds from the outside. And, you know, certain, you know, technical issues in the studio, the piano, like all kinds of things get in the way of you appreciating maybe like what
Yeah.
it's actually like from an objective standpoint. And then so sometimes it takes a long time, you know, until you can hear it from the outside. And after about a year, I was able to hear it from the outside in a sufficient way that I said, you know what, let me see like if I could, you know, mix and, you know, take another listen to this stuff and see how it comes out. So,
Hmm.
but at that point, COVID was already happening. Studios were closed. Um, just, you know, long period of time went by, and then I finally actually did the mix, and I just did the master, and I just sent it back to Eric and Ruben, so to see what they think. So there's a good chance that sometime this coming year we'll release that project. Uh,
Yeah.
as a not as an Aaron Goldberg trio record, but as like a little group
That's
project.
super.
Um, and it's you know, totally different from any of my records because the way it came about is totally different. Uh, as an idea of Eric, where we all just like came in and brought a couple things and just recorded, um, and it has that vibe. So it's
That's
not
beautiful.
like necessarily like a touring band or like a clear concept record, but it does have chemistry and it does have a certain cool thing that my other records don't have because it really is the product of all three of our concepts brought together. It's not
Yeah.
sort of them fitting into my concept. It's like some concept that's the product of
That's
the three
beautiful.
of us in an organic way with no discussion.
Yeah.
Which so there's a lot more of like there's a lot more Ruben on the record, and there's
Oh, beautiful.
conceptually there's more Eric as well. But you know, I think the biggest difference is there's a lot more of like Ruben's kind of anyway. You know,
Featured. Yeah. Oh, beautiful,
yeah,
man.
featured it like not just in terms of like a lot of solos, but also just in terms of like what music we play. You know, the repertoire
Presence. Yeah. Yeah.
influence. So it's a different kind of record, but I think hopefully it'll give us an opportunity to do some more playing, and maybe it'll lead to another, you know, more traditional,
Yeah.
not in a way, uh, you know, trio project in the future. But anyway, that's so that the plan is to release that,
Oh,
assuming
beautiful.
that Eric and Ruben are good with it, and um, we'll figure out how we're going to release that. But that's the next thing.
Oh, man. Beautiful. Looking
I
forward.
also
Yeah.
have I have another thing in the can that, or the next other thing that's happening is the trio with Omer Avital and Ali Jackson. So
Ah,
we're all
that's still happening. Also, the trio.
that trio, yeah, which is now called Yes Trio.
Yeah.
Yeah, we released something for a French label, which I really
Hmm.
don't. Between us, I'm not a big fan of the sound of the record, but there's good music on it, and it won some award in France. Like some, some French people won't like it, but um, and the tunes are great, and the you know band is great. As a musician, you know, sound matters, so
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
I I can't take credit for the sound. I can't blame you for the sound either. um, that Yes Trio. It's called Groove du Jour, Groove of
Oh,
the
okay.
Day.
Let's check it out. Okay.
Anyway, that record came out, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I think, and we have another one that's going to come out at some point, hopefully with better sound.
Yeah. It's funny that that trio is completely different than the one with Ruben and Eric.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah. I mean, intentionally so.
yeah.
Intentionally
It's I
so.
mean it's in a great way, you know. But it's just like as a rhythm section, those guys function completely different, which is amazing to hear just that already. I love that.
Yeah, completely different, and I really do feel affinity for both. Like I feel
Sure.
good in both situations. Um, yeah.
Sure. Cool. Cool, Aaron. there are other things to ask. Maybe over a beer one day or something like that.
Sure, man. Yeah, whatever. Totally.
You know, thanks for sharing some of these thoughts so that I don't take more of your time. So really,
My pleasure. I have a question for you. What inspired this, this kind of library of all these different musicians, some of whom are like amazing. You have so many. I saw who you interviewed. How did your idea of doing this come about?
well, you know, I studied like, you know, I didn't study music. I studied actually translation and poetry. So
Oh,
I was always like categorizing things, and beside being a musician, you know, I'm really obsessed with reading these encyclopedias all the time, and
oh,
you know, Penguin Guide to Jazz, listening to records, liner notes, and I just love this history behind it. And I always love also the players. Don't want to make it sound wrong, but behind it, you know what I mean? It's like I love talking to Eric Harland about his, you know, or Eric McPherson, or you, or I mean, all of you are leaders as well. But like, you know, you push other leaders, their music up front also, and then I started just talking to some friends over Skype, and during the first lockdown, and you know, I started asking them, like, you know, talking with friends, like, yeah, but why did you do that? Blah, blah, blah. And then like Howard Levy, the harmonica player, he was like, man, you should start doing like, you know, recorded stuff and, you know, do it. And then now it became like an obsession, you know. It's like, it's really like, man, I just go through the records and like, man, okay, shit, I really want to hear, you know, what your story is and what Eric Harland's story is, or whoever, you know. And
well, the
I
really
love
cool
that,
thing,
you know.
you probably know this already, but I mean, this medium, right? Zoom and
Hmm?
video interviews has changed, interviewing forever, right? So people have probably interviewed other people for long periods of time, and it was always dictation and you transcription, written down, archive goes in the library somewhere. Well, in the future, instead of the jazz library in a book, the Encyclopedia of Jazz Musicians, you're going
Exactly.
to have an archive of some material exactly like this. Maybe it will be the, Sami archive somewhere in Ljubljana, and
Yeah.
future jazz students that want to know like what was Joe Lovano like, they'll
Yeah.
just go to the archive, they'll enter their password, and they'll be able to access it from Timbuktu or Madagascar, or,
Exactly.
you know, and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Thank
I
you.
mean, it's just something contributing at least to you. You know, like I love hearing the stories. Also, it's purely egoistic. Also, in a way. You know, I love, like you said, you know, listening to you or Joe Lovano or whoever, Joe Chambers.
Joe
You
Chambers.
know, man, you know what happened in 1965 or something. You know, Barry
Yeah,
Altschul.
I'm gonna go to the Sami archive and listen to Joe Chambers. Joe Chambers was teaching at the New School when I was there,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he was the famously toughest teacher. Unfortunately, never had a chance to have him for class, but he was the one that you would always like have to
One of the
have
masters.
a hallway. I mean, with good reason, right? But yeah,
Yeah, exactly. But
Chambers.
yeah, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Cool,
you.
Aaron. Thanks to you too.
My pleasure.
Uh,